let's talk about amusement parks, like rides and rides in the dark. Rides right here and rides all over, but mostly coasters, mostly coasters. We'll talk about all kind of things, but mostly coasters.
What's going on, everybody? My name is Mario. We have a different type of video here today. It's going to be sort of like podcasty, sort of just less edited, which is not usually what I do, but hopefully it's not terrible. We're going to be talking about, or sort of debating rather, what is and what is not a credit. It's going to be split up into a couple parts, the first being coasters that are widely considered to be a roller coaster, but just the number of credits that they are is in contention. And the next section is going to be different ride types that are debatable whether or not they are coasters. As you can see, I have quite a few people with me. Some of them are pictures, some of them are video, and then some of them are a terrifying combination of the two. Starting on my left, I don't know how it's going to turn out once the video is recorded, but we have Zach, who's playing with a microscope or something or another.
It's a lens. It's a camera lens.
What is that?
Okay,
it's a microscope. I mean, it's like
camera lens.
It's a microscope. It's a telescope. It's a telescope attached to a camera, if you think about it. And then over on my top right, we have Jeff the fish. Middle left, we got Drew from Parks Bros, who you all know because all of you are subscribed to him as well. And then below me, we have Sammy, also Q Review on Instagram, whose hair sometimes is a picture, sometimes is not, depending on the background features. Middle right, we got Dorian. Wow. And then down at the bottom by his lonesome, we got Cliff, who is rocking Rougarou. Oh, there he is. That's not terrifying at all. You can also check out his Instagram at Analog Thrills. So how many of you guys count credits, first of all?
I do.
Not Dorian.
What's a credit?
Up until my 100th, I did.
Okay, so Zach does. Jeff?
I do. Yep, sorry.
But like after my 100th, I was like, sorry.
Okay, Jeff is he is a fish after all. It's difficult for him to speak. Sammy says she does. Drew says he does. Dorian does not. And Cliff, you do.
Yeah.
So we got a mix. So I'm assuming all of you guys at some point have run into a specific ride or a specific coaster that makes you question whether or not you are going to consider it as a credit.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing we're going to talk about, and I feel like this kind of segues into a bunch of other coasters from this, or a bunch of different types of coasters from this topic, is clones. So do you guys consider a separate clone to be a separate coaster? So for example, Batman the Ride at Magic Mountain, if you were to go over Georgia and ride there, Batman the Ride, would you consider that to be a new credit? Or is one clone that is the exact same layout, is that one credit? Whoever wants to chime in, go for it.
Well, I consider them separate credits.
Zach just said yes. It was, it was an either or, not a yes or no.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mostly because it's different track. It's the same layout, but I mean...
It's interesting that you bring those two facts up because, again, that definitely will bring us into the next topics later.
Mm-hmm. They're different credits.
They're different credits?
Yeah. I mean, I've been on 4 Batman clones now, 3 Batman clones.
I've been on like 6 or something, and I count them. They're different.
I count them all, but that's because they're all different in their own ways. Some have one less car. Some are like in a different setting. I mean, all of them are in different settings.
Right, and then interesting that you bring up different settings because that also brings us into some other topics of discussion later.
Okay. Segue.
Seeds.
So,
Also,
I think we all agree that, generally speaking, clones are separate credits, right?
Well, we gotta have an official vote, you know.
Okay, Zach.
You gotta tally it.
Clone or no? Okay, clone.
Wait,
is it? Wait, that's not the question. Okay.
Yes, it is a clone.
Clones, are they separate credits?
Yes.
But fish.
Yes.
Drew.
Yes.
Sammy.
Yes.
Wait, who's Ruger? Cliff.
It's me.
I'm forgetting everybody's names. Who are you guys?
I think
Dorian.
it's what? I didn't even get to finish.
wait. It's midnight. I'm
This is a mess
sorry.
already.
I got no sleep.
It
the
is
last couple
12
You're drunk.
a.m.
Drunk.
Why are you taking so long on Cliff, bro? Like, come on.
Because he never got to say yes or no. I don't know.
Yeah.
Our clones are different credits. Okay. And then Dorian.
And that is a yes
Andrew.
from Dorian. Thank you.
Okay, I'll take it. Thanks, Zach.
What's that tally? 7 yes, 0
Yeah,
no?
that's going to be 100% yeses is what I'm looking at. That's
Oh, I was
an
thinking
overwhelming
90%.
unanimous decision. All right, next up, we're going to talk about relocations. So, for example, if you rode Batman the Ride at Six Flags New Orleans, and then you ride it again at Six Flags Fiesta Texas as Goliath, does that count as 2 credits or does that count as 1? I'm going to say that I think that is 1 credit because you have ridden that ride before. Putting it in a new setting, though it changes the ride experience somewhat, it also might be rougher because taking apart a ride and rebuilding it somewhere else can often lead to that.
Or it
but
just might be on top of a building in Boomerang, for instance.
right. But I do not think that that makes it a new credit because you have ridden that ride in its entirety before.
Well, for me
yeah.
as well. I mean, I kind of have somewhat of an arbitrary criteria for what is considered a credit, and
Right.
part of that criteria is track build, or the track that was built and put into a location.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
used and utilized, and if that's being moved somewhere else,
Right.
but it's still the same track that you've traversed before, it wouldn't really necessarily qualify for a new credit. Now there could be some factors that might make it different. For instance, like Firebird, for instance.
Right. And we'll talk about we'll definitely talk about
train swaps, I'm sure, at some point.
yeah,
But-
that's definitely going to come up.
Yeah. But yeah, just fitting that criteria alone of traversing track.
That's definitely a general guideline that I like to follow as well.
Mhm.
Hi, Zach. You've gone
Stand
far
farther
in the
away.
back, and Drew is painting himself. But yeah, okay. Yeah, I tend to follow that same sort of philosophy, if you will. You can't even see my air quotes.
Yeah, and also that would be a similar logic for counting like coasters at the fair that get torn down every year and rebuilt in the exact same way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or
Yeah.
just just the traveling coasters in general. Like if you ride
Olympia looping at one location and it goes somewhere else.
It's still Olympia looping.
you're riding
at
the
end of
same
day.
exact coaster. I think that's actually a
Mhm.
fantastic way of putting it, bringing the fair coasters into the mix.
I
Yeah.
mean, as much as I'd like to go ride Boomerang on top of that building now and count it as a second credit, I mean, it's still Boomerang. It's the original
Yeah.
it's Boomerang
Well,
from.
but also, it's like, hey, I mean, if you want to experience it in a different location and that's fun to you, I mean,
mean,
riding
go
coasters is
for
about
it.
having fun.
I
but
just
this is
personally wouldn't count it as a separate coaster credit.
All right, so I think we kind of have the same general consensus with this one as well. Does anyone
This
else
is going
want
to be
to
another
chime
7-0
in
vote.
here?
Yes.
Zach.
Yeah.
Oh, you're saying yes. Well, okay. Does anyone have anything else to add to it before we start voting? Okay, so we got a yes from Zach. We're gonna get a yes from me. It is. Wait, what are we saying yes to this time?
Yeah, I was gonna say you're saying no, it's not another credit.
No, it's not another credit.
Relocations, same credit. I say same credit. Zach
Yeah,
says
same
same credit. Jeff, same credit.
Yep, same credit.
Drew said same credit. Sammy, same credit.
Yeah, sure.
Why can't I think of your name, Cliff, when I see the picture of Ruger? Your face isn't there. So
I
I
am
just-
Cliff, man.
you already told me that you are of the opinion that it is 1 credit.
Yes.
And then Dorian, do you think it's 1 credit even if it changes locations?
He is currently muted.
Okay, cool. So well, again, Zach, how would you like to interpret that answer?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to go with another unanimous decision on that one. So why don't we go ahead and start off with, we're going to talk about whether or not we consider racing coasters to be 1 or 2 credits. Obviously, there's a couple of different criteria when it comes to or classifications rather, when it comes to racing coasters. We have Mobius Loop racing coasters, where it's essentially one track that has two different sides, if you will, that it traverses, but generally is one, or always is one continuous track, whereas you have the two separate tracks that also race, but are technically separate operating tracks. So we're going to start with Mobius Loop, because I feel like Mobius Loops, because I feel like the decision on these are a little less split.
Yeah. It's weird because Racer at Kennywood is,
so that's what I was going to bring up. Is we got Racer at Kennywood, which is like one of the types of Mobius Loop coasters where it has two stations, but then you also have Twisted Colossus, which is a racing Mobius Loop coaster.
Technically, they're called
does not
different
have
things.
two stations.
Twisted Colossus and West Coast Racers are called quasi-Mobius Loop coasters, whereas Racer at Kennywood is just a Mobius Loop coaster.
Yeah.
Interesting. I didn't even know that. Drew dropping fact bombs on me over here.
I have no life.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and say that I'm of the opinion no matter what the Mobius Loop is, it's one credit. And I think in the case of something like Kennywood's Racer, I
It's
think
a little bit of a gray area.
Yeah, because then it's like if you get into the territory of do you have half a credit because you didn't ride the full thing? But you could also say like, well, I rode Goliath and then got stuck on the mid course and had to get off, and that was the only time I rode it. I would say you get the credit there. I mean, you rode the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You did ride it, and just because you didn't complete the entire circuit does not mean you don't get the credit. That's my
You got your
opinion.
butt in the vehicle, you're good.
And it moved. Make sure
Butt
And
in
it
the vehicle
moved.
and it moved, right?
Yeah.
If you only went up the lift hill, then, maybe we have a
Well,
different story
then-
because you didn't, no gravity happened
Gravity
at any
did
point.
not occur.
Well, gravity occurred, but you
Gravity
know, you get what I'm
occurred,
saying.
yeah.
The gray area.
Yeah. So but for the Twisted Colossus situation, Twisted Colossus West Coast Racers, 100% one credit in my mind. There's no gray area there.
I guess it would maybe come down to questioning if your credit counts as traversing the course that the manufacturer intended.
That's
if
true.
you're following me.
Yeah, because I've never really considered the other side, because I haven't I kind of understood like a potential argument. But yeah, I think when you say that, it makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So that's why Racer kind of gets in like a weird spot, because it's intended to be one side per, and then you get off and you board again to the other side if you so please.
Yeah.
And it does deliver a slightly different ride experience on both sides, because inside versus outside turns.
Right. And I mean, taking back into consideration the argument of like, well, if you get an evac on a coaster, maybe if you're really picky, you can try to say I'm considering half credits as well, which I mean, I think would stand out in your coaster count, just to say your evac are stuck in the ride in the first place.
Yeah. But I think when you start calling things half a credit, I think that's like it gets so technical, and then like even
it's like saying you have half a penny. Like, come on, just get the whole penny.
Right.
But what's to say, like, realistically, if you get evac from a coaster and it opens back up later in the day, you're going to go back and get a full circuit on it, But at one point, are you going to walk away and be like, well, I got 1.5 rides on this coaster? Some people might actually do that just for the fun of it.
That's like being like stuck on like mid-course.
Like
you get slammed on mid-course and you don't have the rest.
But
of
like
how's your eyesight, Zach?
Some people value the idea of rolling back on a coaster, like Top Thrill Jackster or Full Throttle or whatever.
See, I think that's ridiculous, because I think it goes back to what you were saying with the track.
Yeah,
and I like that philosophy, with the exception of one thing that we'll talk about later. But you're traversing that specific track. It doesn't matter if you're going forwards, backwards, whatever the case may be. You're traversing that track. That track is the credit.
But I think in quasi-Mobius terms, I mean, even the parks say it's one coaster for Twisted Colossus.
Yeah, I don't think.
But like Racer, Kennywood, definitely more of a gray area.
That's a weird gray area. But for me, it's all connected one track.
I think just because it's one track, it's one credit as a whole. And I mean, it just depends on the person if they count it as like, oh, I got half of it today, hopefully I can get half of it later, or
Yeah.
So in general, Mobius Loop coasters, Zach, 1 credit or 2 credits?
1.
What the hell are you guys doing? Okay, 1 credit from Zach. I'm gonna go ahead and say Mobius Loop coasters, 1 credit. Jeff?
I'll agree with 1.
Drew?
1.
Sammy?
1.
Cliff? I don't know what's wrong with me.
Ruby.
I'm gonna say 1 for the most part.
And then Dorian?
1.
Okay.
Sweet. Zach, when you go to bed, I think Dorian's just not going to be here anymore. Okay, so it looks
Stay
like
above.
another unanimous decision. Okay, well, Mobius loops, relocations, and clones, I feel like, are some of the least contentious, with the exception of like Mobius loops, probably the most contentious thus far. Now that we're done talking about Mobius loop coasters, more traditional racing coasters like Gemini at Cedar Point, the original Colossus, and American Eagle at Six Flags Great America, where there are 2 stations and 2 separately operating tracks. My opinion is that these are 2 separate credits. We can talk about the reasoning later. I'll let you guys talk and let me know what your guys' thoughts are.
Well, I think my answer is pretty simple because I've already stated earlier, sort of my air quotes
Mhm.
philosophy.
Here, I'll do it for you.
There you go. Thank you.
Philosophy.
Philosophy on how I gauge a credit. You know, again, it's down to the traversing of track, and it's
Right.
traversing 2 different types of track that, you know, are intended by the manufacturer to be traversed differently. So yeah, I know two different credits for sure.
And I think it also goes back to like what you were talking about, the philosophy originally when we were talking about clones, but I think it goes back to clones perfectly well. It's essentially a clone that is just right next to a clone of itself.
Right.
Which if you're going to count clones as 2 different credits, I don't see why you wouldn't count Racing Coaster as 2 different credits as well.
Yeah.
Logic is great.
And they're not even clones
Dorian.
per se because they've got different turn radiuses.
Yeah, in pretty much
especially-
every single case, there's a different turn radius depending on the turn. Or if it's mirrored layouts, well, then there you go. It's mirrored. It's a left turn as opposed to a right
Yeah.
turn,
Yeah.
like a racer at Kings Island, for example.
It kind of
Now,
goes
here's-
along that same line with being a cloned coaster.
Now
Right.
here's an interesting question.
Yeah.
Would you consider Superman Escape from Krypton
Well,
at Magic Mountain?
I'm glad you brought that up because
Me too.
that for me personally has been one of the biggest questions when I'm counting credits. To me, it can be anywhere from 1 credit to 4 credits. We'll talk about some of the other reasons later, but I have recently changed it from 1 credit to 2. I used to count it as 1 because
Did
it
I
does
convert you?
literally the exact same thing, whereas most other racing or dueling coasters have like the slightest variations, like Jeff was saying, the turn radius is being different, or them being mirrored. But I do consider Superman 2 different credits because when you think about it as clones, I count clones as separate credits. Therefore, this is just 2 clones on the same tower.
Yeah.
So I have
Drew.
191 credits. Dang.
So what does that make my 100th coaster?
There you go, Drew. What do you think about that? Your on and off background / foreground has been Superman
Yeah.
throughout this. What do you think?
I think they're 2 different credits, and that really just comes down to they are 2 different things of track. They're 2
Right.
different, coasters.
And you can easily
realistically.
operate one without the other. It's not like the dispatch button for one
Exactly.
sends them both out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, you don't loop around to the next side or anything like that.
Mhm.
So, in my mind, it's 2 different coasters, at least for as credits go. Now, as like a ride, I count it as 1. It's kind of like the Matterhorn.
Well, I'm glad you
you know?
brought that up though, because the way I look at it is 2 credits, 1 attraction.
hmm Well, same with the Matterhorn. Matterhorn,
Yep.
though, has
Yeah.
completely different layouts on either side.
Yeah,
But
Matterhorn I
everyone's
feel like
"Oh,
is
let's go
almost
ride."
it's almost undisputedly 2
Yeah.
credits because they're so different. I mean,
The only
everyone
people
can
that are
tell.
going to say, "Oh, let's go on Tomorrowland side," are like the crazy Disney people, aka me or Zach.
Mhm.
So
It's not even just enthusiasts at that point. It's like just Disney
Yeah.
people that can tell the
Yeah.
differences.
Right. Well, it's also just this is where it starts to become a little bit arbitrary in a way. Because most people, like you said, will consider it just 1 attraction.
Mhm.
Even though technically, like, enthusiasts are a little bit more nitpicky about, how should I say in a polite way, credit hoarding.
Hoarding, yes, that's the exact
Hoarding.
word I
That's the
used.
way
I
to
was
say
trying
it.
to be family friendly.
And if you're the type that wants to credit hoard, you may start looking at the technicalities and start saying to yourself, well, maybe I should start to consider it 2 credits because when you credit hoard, you're a hoarder. That's just all there is to you're a hoarder and you need help.
Yeah. But I mean, when you look at it like for different ride types as well, like drop towers, like the Hershey Park has one attraction that is 3 different drop towers. So it's like, well, one attraction can have multiple different ride elements to it.
Yeah.
Well, like another one of those is Knight's Tournament down at Legoland, California. There are 4 different ride vehicles.
Yeah,
but it's still one attraction.
And they're all separately operating with their own panels and everything like that.
Yeah,
different programs as well. So yeah, I think one attraction can be multiple different rides.
Certain simulators like Star Tours or Wild Arctic, rest in peace.
There you go. Yeah,
completely different rides and vehicles that are all operated manually in different times and all that, but they're the same attraction.
So again, not much contention. Does anyone share a differing viewpoint that racing coasters are 1 credit as opposed to 2?
I agree, but I do kind of have to wonder to what extent with certain rides. I think Superman's a big one.
Superman, I feel like is for me personally, the closest to not being considered 2. I said, until yesterday, I did consider it 1 on my count.
Yeah,
so.
It's a really sticky one. I don't know.
It's the most unique out of all of the other ones.
Yeah,
I feel like.
But I mean, if you want to try to be consistent with your philosophy, yeah, it is 2 credits.
Mm-hmm. And that's why I changed it, because I'm like, well, if I'm considering clones, then it's just a side by side clone. All right. Well, you know what, guys? I think we just have the entire coaster world figured out, and we might as well just end the video here, and everyone's just gonna agree with us. And we found world peace. I think I'm gonna.
Steel Vengeance is my 100th credit.
In case I edited out of the last part, Zach went to bed, so thank you for his help for being himself and being Dorian. Everyone's in different spots, but it is what it is. All right, next up we are going to talk about retracking. And I know we've been talking about a lot. Yeah, we are going to talk. We have been talking about amusement parks.
Flat rides.
Not a whole lot of flat rides or rides in the dark.
Out, huh? When you dropping that on iTunes, huh?
I mean, if people will buy it, I'm pretty convinced that half of my viewership comes from people watching only the intro and then dipping. But I'll take it however I can get it, right? Okay, next up we have retracts, and we've been talking a lot about the track itself is what makes it a credit a lot. Cliff's philosophy, which I feel like we all at least share some parallels with. But how do you guys feel about retract entirely, partially, whether or not it makes a change to the layout? How do you guys feel about retract coasters in calling them new credits?
I think it depends on what type of ride it is.
Yeah, I definitely
something
think it varies.
Something
I
like
am going to make all of you give me a definitive one way or the other, but let's just talk about it first.
But especially with a wooden coaster, you've still got the same support structure. You've still got all the same surrounding wood.
Mm-hmm.
And most of that's actually being replaced a lot of the time anyways, just for maintenance purposes.
I think it's interesting that you bring up wooden coasters, because that is a big reason that I personally don't consider retracking to be a new credit.
They get
wooden coasters you have
all
to
the time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How often are you going to consider the Voyage, which is constantly being retracked,
right,
a new credit every single time?
Well, because if that's your new park and you've been going there for 20 years, you have 20 credits from one attraction.
Yeah.
So that's when I think it comes down to another personal criteria where okay, traversing track is one thing, but are you going to factor in layout as well? And I know this is going to be a topic.
Well, then it kind of contradicts the clone argument, though.
Right, and that's why I think a lot of this stuff is kind of arbitrary in a way.
Yeah, no, I agree completely, because I agree with what you're saying, but I'm just pointing out the fact that mindset does contradict itself.
Yeah.
Right.
And just to be clear, this is retracking without modification. So just to give an example, like the Incredible Hulk and I guess slight modification in Ghost Rider, where it's a new manufacturer putting in new track, but the layout is almost identical to the original.
Yeah, I think personally,
there's some differences on Ghost Rider, but not crazily.
in banking. So Ghost Rider is a less clear cut, but something like Incredible Hulk, I'm assuming they just exact same blueprints, make the track almost exactly the same as it was before, and you have the exact same layout.
I think personally, as long as there's like 50% or more, something is retracked or different, I think I can kind of lean towards it's a new credit.
Interesting. Okay, cool. We have a first disagreement here.
My only thing is like with Incredible Hulk, did they reuse those supports? I don't know.
Yeah.
I
I'm
think
pretty sure they did. Yeah,
But they redid all of the track on that thing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So that's where I'd be like, okay, but that's because we don't really see that for steel coasters much. Whereas if I put it in the
Right.
same category, like, oh, wooden coasters have it done
That's
all the
why
time.
I like
Yeah.
the wooden
It's the
coaster point.
same.
Well, with Incredible Hulk, at that point, it almost unintentionally would bring it into the realm of a clone.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then that's why like I think it's very interesting when you like if you're comparing it to clones and that like the entire like the philosophy that we've been talking about the entire time, a lot of things would point to it being a new credit if you want to, just use the arguments that we've been using. Which I think retracking of a steel coaster is the only instance where my philosophy is like sort of contradictory to itself.
But that rarely happens. I mean, the only times we've seen that in the past couple of years are like with Python over in Europe of a Coma looping coaster, and then
you also have the SLC at Mobius Pier.
Yeah,
there is one specific coaster I wanted to bring up, and that's Journey to Atlantis.
Yes, that's another.
Because the track is different, the supports are different, and the ride experience, I'd argue, is a lot different from riding it beforehand. And I do think they might have changed some of the angles. I just don't think it's the exact same as it was before the retracking.
And it probably, I mean, it most likely isn't, especially with the technological advances since 2003 in coaster designing. 2000. Okay, 2004. Sorry.
The thing I don't like about the experience is different. Like it offers a different ride experience. Being an argument when you're talking about coaster credits is the fact that there are so many different things that can factor into whether or not it's a new or different ride experience. For example, sitting in the front row versus sitting in the back row, riding a ride during the day versus the night, time of year even. So I'm not going to count, a front row ride versus a back row ride as a different credit. Right. So just saying that it offers a different ride experience, I feel like, no offense, Jeff, I feel like it's a terrible argument.
Well, I mean,
I think we'll get to that later.
We will get to that later as well.
That does kind of go against my argument of like I often personally consider the Beast at Night a different coaster because it feels like a different coaster.
But it's still the same credit.
But you're speaking like sort of like hyperbolically, right?
Yeah, but I guess I should just boil it down to the track's different, the supports are different.
Yeah, and then that's where I feel like that the argument that it is a different credit is more valid. And it really is confusing because it's like, well, what percentage of the roller coaster needs to be changed for it to be considered a new roller coaster? Yeah. You kind of get into percentages at that point.
But I mean, with wooden coasters, a lot of the time, 100% of that will be replaced eventually.
But it's like 10% here, 10% there, and it's like, well, unless you're getting the exact numbers from the park, which I bet they don't even know how much of a percent of the track is being changed throughout like 10 years. Unless you get that number, there's no way to definitively say one way or the other. So you kind of just have to say entirely is retracking a new credit or not.
It's just I think when you are factoring in the idea that these coasters are kind of built to have to withstand the test of time for a long time, to be lucrative and business, blah 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 blah. It's at a certain point you have to kind of ask yourself, when do I let my scruples go of what I consider a credit and just accept
just consider it like upkeep.
Upkeep at that. You consider it necessary at that point.
Well, I think that there were a lot of interesting points brought up for both sides of the argument, but just to sort of generalize it, because I know that there is, a lot of subtlety, but
to that,
if we're going to generalize, I'll start with Cliff because you're at the first on my screen now. Does retracking a ride make it a new credit? And again, just generalization. You have to say one way or the other.
Yes or no.
Retracking without major modification to the layout.
That's so hard.
Is that a new credit or not?
It's really hard, but
Because we'll talk about
think,
layout modifications next. But without layout modifications, is that a new credit? And whatever layout modifications means to you.
I think the majority of the time, no.
Okay, so that's a no. It is. So retracking is not a new credit from you.
Majority of the time, no. Yeah.
Okay, Sammy, is retracking a new credit?
Yes and no. I know I can't say that, but
I know because this one there's a lot of subtlety.
There's a lot of stuff to it. Yeah, I think it really is up to discretion. But if I had to say, I'd probably say yes. If it's not based on maintenance, it's more based on like this thing needs an overhaul.
Okay.
If that makes any sense. Yeah.
Okay, Jeff. So we have 1 and 1.
Yes.
You're gonna say it's a retrack is a new credit.
Yes, as long as it's like a significant part, not like 1 foot of track.
Okay. And then Drew, is retracking a new credit? We have two yeses, 1 no.
It's coaster to coaster basis, you know.
It's boomerang coaster to coaster.
Yes, it is. But it really depends on what it is, because like I could see Hulk being argued because that was pretty much all of the track. Right?
Yeah.
Ghost Rider, you could definitely argue it was all of the track, and then some slight modifications too. Journey, I mean, you could definitely argue it. Most of these coasters you could argue. Now, of course, if it's just Voyage or Thunder Run and they're just retracking it for general maintenance, then no, of course not. Right. But I think personally, I would say
so if retracking without modifications, whatever without modifications means to you.
Layout modifications, I guess.
I would say it is not a new credit. Personally.
Okay, Dorian. Wow, there you go. All right, so it's 2-2, and I'm going to go ahead and say I don't think it's a new credit. So there you have it from the not a new credit. Wow. Okay, so that makes it a 4-2. Okay, and then retracts or just general layout modifications. Do you guys think that makes it a new credit? And just to give a couple of examples, Shivering Timbers at Michigan's Great Adventure used to have a trick track, which is where the straight track would like change in elevation on either side, so it like kind of wobble. And then of course Son of Beasts loop removal. Do you think layout modification or like removal of a helix, I know some coasters have done that, or you know, changing the helix into just a turnaround, do you guys consider things like that making a coaster a new credit?
That's
personally, because I mean, in essence, it's still mainly the same coaster, especially like with at lake compounds. Boulder Dash, it had a triple up, right? Or was it a triple
up? It went from triple to double up.
Yeah, and so it went to a double, and it's still like 90% the same coaster. I mean, with Son of Beast, the loop, which is a huge part of that original attraction, was taken out. Yeah, but I mean, technically, track wise, it's
right. If you're looking at it like mathematically, there's hardly any difference.
Those are all credits that I think those are all coasters that I think are very circumstantial individually, because I think about the coaster at Expo Land in Japan, same park where Fuji Ramen was. There was a coaster there that had 5-track racing coaster until eventually 3 of the tracks were removed and it was combined into one, making it one of the longest coasters in the world.
Well, I'd argue that's a major modification.
Yeah, that's a pretty huge modification.
Because to each individual, for each individual one of those to be tripled in size, essentially, that's a major modification, despite the fact that actual track pieces, only a few of those are being changed. But so essentially, the one coaster it being tripled in size is a massive modification. If you're looking at it from sort of like a mathematical perspective, honestly.
I'd also argue that in cases where like the removal of Son of Beast loop or the changing of an element, it's usually has to do with maintenance, and usually it's like a problem area.
That's true, actually, because even I'm pretty sure Dododompa's top hat was a maintenance thing as well, so the loop was just lower stress.
Right, and I mean that's
another example.
Reason why we're not counting wooden coasters.
Exactly. That goes back to our argument previously about at what point are you going to sit there and say, well, maintenance requirements are going to really dictate exactly what a new credit is.
I think in most cases, like a modification is only going to be, I think Drew said like somewhere around 10% of the layout, at most even.
Mhm.
And then there's other situations like Space Mountain at Disneyland, which Drew, you're the Disney guy, so you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the original even on RCDB, the original Space Mountain and the 2005 opened Space Mountain have entirely different layouts, right?
Right.
Yeah. From what I remember, they have similar layouts, but they're different.
I mean, they're similar in the fact that it's like a
they're-
it's a brake run and then a turn and then a brake run and a turn.
Cliff,
but, you know, and
I never rode the original Space Mountain.
I
did, and
So
the
I've only
original
seen models of it.
The original Space Mountain is very similar to the Space Mountain that's operating at Disney World.
Okay.
I mean, that's kind of similar to the Big Bad Wolf versus Verbolten change.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, actually, that's a
Maybe not as
fantastic way of putting it.
extreme.
But you have a different manufacturer going in, and they're reusing certain aspects of it. But I mean, and then you can talk about RMC as well.
Yeah.
I mean, like that's technically a retracking, but the major modification. So I think we could say like minor modification is somewhere between like 0 and 20, like 20% maybe, and then major modification is more than 50%. I think you can actually break like modifications into those two separate categories. I think most people would be perfectly fine with saying that the two Space Mountains are different credits, or the, like, obviously for Bolton and Big Bad Wolf, most people are going to consider two different credits, whereas the removal of an element or two, I think a majority of people are going to consider that to still be one credit. So as far as the minor modification to a layout, where do we all stand? Sammy, you've now somehow ended up where Cliff was. So what is your final vote? Do you think minor layout modification, is it a new credit?
For me personally, yes, but it's only more of like if you took the same coaster and you put a new element on it and moved it to a different park, would it make it kind of like a different credit in a way?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to like that clone thing too. If it was cloned with a new element, I feel like people that don't count clones would even count that as a new credit at a different park. So I think either way is a valid opinion to have. Okay, so we have a yes, it is a new credit from Sammy. Jeff, new or same credit?
It is new credit.
Okay, 2 new credits. Cool. I'm up to 190 now. Drew, new credit or same credit?
Same credit, if it's minor, obviously.
Yeah. I think we've all come to the general agreement what a minor versus major modification is. So, yeah.
I'm sorry, we're talking about minor.
Yeah, we're talking about
sorry.
like
they are the same credit.
Okay, so we have 2 sames, 1 new. Cliff, same credit or new credit?
If it's minor, I'm going to say it's the same credit.
Okay. And then Dorian? Same. Okay, I'm going same. So sorry, Sammy. Outvoted once again. Okay. As far as major modifications go, I think we're all on the same page that something modifications. Yeah, a modern modification. That's an RMC right there. I think we can all agree that those are new credits, and I didn't even put that as a category, so we'll just not do a vote on that one. Okay, finally, last but not least, in this first half, which has been insanely long.
Half?
Where's the half? Yeah, the second half will be a lot quicker. The second half will be quicker. Don't worry.
You sure about that one?
Yes. We're going to talk about conversions. So real quick, my take on conversions, like stand up to floorless, or for example, if say Blue Fire at what's that park? Europa Park were to change entirely to spinning trains. I think that's one credit because it's still the same exact track, going through the same layout. Does it change the ride experience? Yeah, totally. But one credit. What do you guys think about conversions, different trains, and also trains going backwards, like if they're switched for like a haunt or something like that?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, I would never consider Revolution a new credit to New Revolution, even though
that's another good example.
Trains.
Yeah.
It's a different experience.
Mm-hmm.
But it contradicts with the whole track length, the traversing a track thing. Like
the track being what is the credit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I would personally say no.
Okay. Sammy, Drew, Dorian?
Drew, what are you doing?
Y'all are gonna love this. Okay, so for me personally, I have in the past counted conversions as separate credits.
Okay.
And that's specifically for.
I guess we should say
B&M.
train conversions because
Yeah,
that's I
train
guess that's more
conversions,
what
yeah.
I'm getting at is like different
Yeah.
new trains or modified trains.
Yes, in the past I rode Vortex at CGA, and then I
Uh-huh.
rode Patriot afterwards. Now the only reason I counted Patriot and Vortex as completely different credits is I know one that kind of is mixed. It's a mixed bag.
Is it because you were
chat.
still GP and thought it was two different rides?
No, I actually knew exactly what happened to it at that point, thankfully. But it was such a different experience that it was hard not to say that it was completely changed.
Yeah.
Also, they did do some like minor maintenance on the track that they wouldn't have done otherwise if they'd kept it open as a stand-up coaster, I'm sure. And they repainted the entirety of the track. I know that's not really something that's...
Yeah, we're not going to talk about whether or not, trust me, this segment's gone on long enough. We don't need to talk about whether or not paint makes something a new credit.
Paint
also-
make something a new credit. Confirmed right here.
But also with the park taking that brand new theme with the attraction too, and just kind of overhauling it to the point where I would actually argue that it was a major modification.
Okay.
But then
The ride.
but then wouldn't Space Mountain be a new credit then? Because there's a major change in theme to some extent.
Oh, you mean like
Are you talking about like the overlays?
Yeah.
That's an interesting point because that's another thing that like affects the ride experience.
I mean, the only thing that changes is the screens and the sound.
But to bring it back to the train, so like you do not think just changing the trains is enough to make it a new credit?
I think it depends on the ride, to be honest, at least personally.
Okay.
I know I'll
interesting.
probably get some hate for it, but like with the B&M conversions, especially with those train conversions, I personally, if I've been on, both the stand-up and the floorless, I'll count them as different. But at this rate, I'm only gonna have one of those. So.
Okay. Interesting.
I have to agree with Drew, and my reasoning is that at their core, you're going from a floorless coaster or from a stand-up coaster to a floorless coaster.
Wow.
And those two are categorically different types of roller coasters.
That's a fair way of putting it. Like
So-
Cliff has been saying, like referring to the manufacturer's intention. That's two different ride models from that manufacturer.
You're
Even
right.
though it's the same
not even
track.
the manufacturer.
Floorless coaster to
It's
the surf
the
coaster.
ride experience is totally different from what a night ride is or what a front row
Yeah.
and back row is.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah, I can definitely say
just to put
Vortex
it
was a piece
simply,
of garbage.
they're different
compared to
coasters.
Patriot.
And so I think like if we're going to organize things based on like if we're just going to organize things like the level of coaster trumps the level of like a type of coaster. So
Yeah.
if you change the coaster, it's automatically a different type of coaster.
Okay,
Yeah.
I can respect it from that perspective, but I just tend to follow like the general Cliff philosophy of track is track,
Right.
track is credit. Sammy, what do you think about it?
I have to go with Jeffrey on that one.
You're on Jeff's point of view.
Yeah.
Dorian, you're just eating a muffin and being yourself.
Really enjoying this time.
Um,
Well, I mean, hey, if I'm not myself, then who am I?
Deep.
Dorian.
I'm not a credit. That's what I am.
I would definitely agree that you are not a credit unless you have Heelys on. Then there's an argument.
Roller skates count?
No, don't get your Heelys, Drew.
I'm about to go get some steel. Hold on.
Hey Drew, when are the Heel Olympics coming?
Stop.
So with all that good stuff being said, let's go ahead and vote. Sammy, is changing the trains a new credit?
Yes.
Okay, Jeff, is changing the trains a new credit?
Yes.
Drew, is changing the trains a new credit?
Yes.
Cliff, is changing the trains a new credit?
Kind of, but leaning more to no.
Okay,
think
so if
it's
you had to say one
it's
way or
a-
the other, you'd say no.
It's a depending thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dorian, is changing the trains a new credit?
No.
I'm going with no too. So we're
that's
split
fine.
on this
50-50.
one. I don't
Here's the
know what to do
tiebreaker. Who
for.
wants to go rock paper scissors right now?
Well-
Look at it like this. It's literally the exact same track design for the coaster it was originally intended. Just putting a new train on it brings a new spin. It doesn't change what the ride is.
Right. It's to me, it's on the same level of like retheming or whatever. It does change the experience. It could make it better, could make it worse. But at the end of the day, The coaster is the track. You know what we can do? The audience can vote. Go ahead and click. You can't even see my hand.
Eye icon on the left side of the right side of the screen.
Click that. Yeah, you can click the icon. I don't have to point at it. You guys are grown up. You can. Well, maybe you're not. I don't know.
It'll pop up and it'll say, "Here, icon, vote now, please."
Go ahead and click on that. So interesting. That was a very interesting one. I felt like the general consensus was going to definitely be more along the lines of new trains is not a new credit, but there you go.
Yeah.
All right.
This is the premise of the whole video.
Alrighty, guys. So actually, this is going to be a two-parter because this is going on for so long. Definitely going to make the next part a little more concise. If you did make it this far, thank you guys so much for watching. I always find what is and what isn't a credit very interesting. We're probably going to do the next part later, so check out for that. Brain no work good. I need a brain doctor.
You mean a nerd section?
Thank you guys so much for watching. Go ahead and give the video a thumbs up if you like it. 2 thumbs down if you didn't like it. You know how it goes. I need to know you didn't like it. And oh yeah, but real quick, check out Sammy Q Review. Check out Jeff. He's in an aquarium coming near to you. Ooh gosh, that was a poor word choice. I'm so good. I'm so good at bad word choices. Go ahead and check out Drew at Parks Bros. I think there might be about 2 or 3 people subscribed to me that aren't subscribed to him. Check out Cliff's Instagram at Analog Thrills. And with all that being said, goodbye.